a very soft and gentle attention, just like a little feather which is floating and falling, gravitating onto the surface of some water. This is actually a very good picture because you can see here that the water hardly moves because of the little feather. So this is a good example.
Was a whale.
Yes, and there is well-being. Well-being is the softness of the mind. Mindfulness is what makes the mind sharp. You can't have sharpness without the softness. You need both. And then you practice consistently. We already discussed this in the previous session. And I will now give you the example of maybe a metaphor to help you understand a bit better why you need both mindfulness and well-being. You can compare this with a sleeping bird. Now, some of you might know this, but for me, it was new information that I discovered some years ago, that when a bird is falling asleep, when it's sleeping at night, have you noticed that it doesn't always have a nest to sleep in? Some species of birds, they simply sleep on the branch on which they are sitting. And you will notice that at night, when they fall asleep, they don't fall from their branch. It would make for quite a sight if all the birds at night would just fall off their branches, right? So they don't do that. So birds, when they sleep at night, how do they sleep? Well, there's many species that don't sleep in their nests. When they sleep, their legs are tightly perching the branch on which they are sitting. So the more they are relaxed, the more their muscles become tighter, and they are able to very securely sleep on a branch. That is their anatomy. It's also the anatomy of the mind. Why? Because when we are becoming more relaxed, it's easier for the mind to be in one single space, one single place, one single object, one single subject that you are focusing on or that you are aware of. So this is the similarity with sleeping birds. You can ignore the internet address here. That's from another, sorry, another group. Don't pay any attention to that. So according to science, as I already mentioned, there are many benefits to meditation. There are positive changes in your brain structure, as has been shown in research sufficiently. Decrease of stress and depression has already been proven for quite a while now. It's also been shown that this has a long-term effect. That means that even if you meditate, if you have meditated already and you're doing something else, then it will still have an effect. This is sometimes called in psychology the default mode network of the brain. It's called that way in neurology. So the default mode network is what your brain or what your mind does when you're not doing anything else, or what your background functioning of your mind is. So this is actually showing, this research is showing that our mind is actually changing the way it functions, the way it works when we meditate often or regularly. There's also an increase in memory and self-awareness, alpha waves, different waves in the brain, different ways our brain communicates, and the alpha waves indicate that our mind is relaxed and at the same time aware. There are parts of the brain that become thicker due to meditation. This has actually been shown in scientific studies. There's also a decrease of blood pressure and stabilization of the heart. And meditation, of course, improves the immune system, which is very relevant these days when people are afraid of illnesses and such. Gives you more antibodies. It helps you chromosomes to change as well, though this is not, this scientific research is still starting. They haven't done much research about this yet. There is some evidence that meditation also changes your chromosomes. And it relieves irritable bowel syndrome, so you don't have to rush to the toilet when you're meditating here with me. These are all the scientific benefits. But there's also the Buddhist story. What does traditional Buddhists say about how meditation is good and how meditation fits in with the Buddhist teaching? Well, you know, the thing is that Buddhism doesn't actually speak much about the brain, but we mostly talk about the mind, which is different from Western science or in generally modern science. There is some scientific evidence, though, that people do have some sort of consciousness apart from the brain. For example, there was in the 50s, there was this guy called John Larber, who did research into hydrocephalus patients. These are patients who were born without any brain. This is an example of a patient like that. Their brain is a bit scattered around the border of the skull, or around the skull. But there is very little brain, if you can see, there's very little brain tissue. Turns out that many of these patients, actually in Lauber's research, had very normal lives. They had normal jobs, they had a normal family life, they were not retarded in any way, and some of them even had a high IQ. So this proved to Lauber that there is actually a lot that we do not know about the brain. So you could say that from a Buddhist perspective, the brain is not the complete answer to what our mind is, what consciousness is. According to Buddhism, the mind is not the same as the body. The brain is like the consciousness of the mind, and our mind works. The brain is like its office. But our mind does have some problems. It tends to wander. It tends to wander off, drift off, finding delight here and there, trying to find some happiness outside, but never finding it. Some Western philosopher once said that the only distraction that we have from our pain and suffering is distraction itself, but in itself that is even wrong, creates even more suffering. This was a bit of a pessimist philosopher, not a very optimist person, but he was right in the sense that our mind is distracted all the time. However, there is some happiness that we can find. When we are learning to meditate, we discover that we can actually find more happiness when our mind is inside our body and not finding distraction outside. So this is something that we have to practice. But normally by nature, our mind tends to wander all the time. But the Buddha, he also said that when our mind wanders, it wanders alone. So what did he mean by that? He meant that when our mind wanders, it thinks of one thing at a time, like a little monkey that jumps from one branch to the other, but it always is on one branch. It can't be on 2 trees at the same time. So because of that reason, we have a choice. We can either bring our mind inside or let it wander outside. We can either be anger and let our mind be involved in that, or we can allow our mind to be kind and soft and all that. So there's choices to be made. That's the only thing I'm saying. And the Buddha, he also said that the mind is very hard to see. It's difficult to control or restrain, but it can be, but you need practice. The mind is very difficult to see because we tend to focus outwards. So when we think we know ourselves, we actually don't know ourselves that well. The mind is always wandering, and because of that, we are often unaware of it. When our mind wanders, it also causes negative emotions and unrealistic perceptions to arise, just like you step in a pool of water which has mud in it, and the mud will start to go through the water, and the water will become murky and muddy. The same way our mind becomes less clear when it starts moving. So because of this reason, in Buddhism, we focus on this process. How can we deal with the negative emotions and unrealistic perceptions in the mind? These negative emotions and unrealistic perceptions, we sometimes call these the defilements. Now, defilements simply means something that makes the mind less than, covers up the bright mind's nature, which causes yourself to be unaware of the brightness. So that's why we call them defilements. So because of that reason, our mind is therefore impaired. We don't really see things as it really is. When our mind has unrealistic perceptions and negative emotions popping up like murk in the water, we don't really see things as they really are. It's like the way we look at the world is not clear anymore. It's murky, it's muddy. Because of that, we sometimes make mistakes. We don't see what is good for our benefit and good for other people's benefit. These are the defilements which we have in our mind. And sometimes it's said that the very idea of enlightenment in Buddhism and the reason why we meditate in Buddhism is to deal with these three. The pictures are a little bit funny, but that's just to make the subject a little lighter. So there is greed. That means that you want something and it's not based on wisdom. You want something that you don't really need, or you want something that just makes you more suffer. Hatred is, of course, clear on itself. We are angry, we want to destroy something or someone. And delusion is not being able to see things as they really are, as I mentioned before. Because of that, because of these, we do not see things as they really are, as I mentioned. And this also creates a lot of suffering for ourselves. Sometimes the Buddha even says that even our greatest enemies cannot hurt ourselves as much as we can hurt ourselves. So the opposite is also true. Our greatest friends, our greatest loved ones cannot give us as much happiness as we can provide to ourselves when our mind is still and happy, when our mind is well trained. So that's how important it is in Buddhist psychology and meditation to train your mind, because it's very fundamental to your happiness and the good functioning of your mind. It is possible to deal with our mind and to train it, because the Buddha, he also said that our mind is luminous by nature, which in Thai language we call papason. Papason means luminous by nature. And sometimes this is from the ancient Indian word papasala, which means something has a light of its own. But we are not aware of that because we often have these hindrances in the mind, like greed, hatred, and delusion. Actually, there's unlimited capacities to our mind. There has been some misunderstanding about this. Some people say our brain has unlimited capacities and we only use 5 or 10% of our brain or something like that. Actually, we use our entire brain, but we do use only a little part of our mind. And I believe that very much, because when you meditate, you do have the feeling that you're tapping into deeper parts of consciousness. Even if you meditate for only a short while, you might have that feeling quite quickly. So there's a lot to unveil there, to reveal there. And there's only a little what we know about our own mind. So the opposite of a mind that is distracted is a mind that is concentrated. But the word that we use in our particular tradition of meditation by Lompu Apagnam or Lompu Sot is the word standstill or stillness. So whenever he taught about meditation, he said the very essence of meditation is the stillness of the mind. to bring the mind to a standstill. So that, he said, is the success of meditation, is the success of one's life. Now we often hear about when we talk about Buddhism, there's often this word quality of the mind, of clarity of the mind. It's actually not all that different from what we call mental health. But mental health, some people think it means you don't have illness, right? That's one thing. But there's more than that, though. Even the World Health Organization recognizes that mental health is more than just mental illness. But they define it as being a good functioning human being, which is not very clear. I mean, what does it mean? It doesn't mean that if you don't have a job, you're not healthy. So in Buddhism, the very definition of mental health, strength, and resilience is right concentration. Now, right concentration in Pali or ancient Indian language is spelled like this.
Titi, is it?
Just a moment. Samma samadhi, and it simply means right concentration, but samadhi is often translated these days as meditation. Now, meditation is actually a Christian word. So there are books which you can find about saints and philosophers in Christianity which talk about the different meditations to think about when you think about your own nature or the nature of Jesus. So the meditation, the word meditation we use in Buddhism and Eastern traditions, but it's actually coming from Christianity originally. The Eastern word is samadhi or samma samadhi. So even in yoga classes, if you do yoga classes sometimes, they will have this word, samadhi, and it means meditation. So actually samadhi means, to be exact, it means the collection or the gathering of the mind in one place, which in German language is sometimes called Geistessammlung, which means literally the collection of the mind. That is actually one of the best translations that I've ever seen for samma samadhi. It does mean a lot more than just concentration. But when we are meditating, we find that the concentration is so different from normal concentration, right? So concentration in your daily life is very focused and you quickly get tired. But the concentration in meditation is very soft and gentle, and you don't feel you're getting tired, do you?
No.
Right? It's not like, oh, I've been meditating so hard, I really need a break now. I actually had a friend who talked like that, and I said to him, I think you're doing something wrong, because if meditation makes you tired, you're really doing something wrong. So it could be, of course, that sometimes we need to change the posture or something like that. But the very act of meditation doesn't make our mind tired at all. It gives us more energy, to be precise. But this shows that there is different types of concentration. Concentration outwards quickly makes us tired. But when we concentrate inwards, it actually is much more softer and subtle, and it gives us energy instead. So this is some notes about, some notes about meditation and the meaning of it in Buddhism. Now to close, we can look at a summary of what it means to train the mind. This little guy is our example today. So the mind of a good quality is soft and pliant. So when we meditate often, it becomes soft and pliant, the mind is easier to use, easier to adjust and be flexible. And the mind is happy as a result, can easily concentrate, and can easily think things through. So even though in meditation we learn to not follow our thinking anymore, not be involved in our thinking, but it doesn't mean that thinking is wrong altogether, of course. We all need to think sometimes. And meditation actually helps us to develop more clarity and more order in our thinking. It's just like you have a drawer and you put all the things in good order, and it's easily for you to find something. In the same way, our mind, when it's very clear in meditation, our thoughts and our memories tend to be well organized. And you can easily focus on something positive. Sometimes when we are in a bad mood and our mind is moody, is murky, is not clear, then sometimes it's difficult to focus on something positive. So when you meditate more often, it's easier to focus on positive things and to look at the goodness of a situation. Like the example of Kunyai Ajahn, the founder, the nun who founded our temple. She actually said she was always somebody who looked at the positive things of situations and problems. So these are some notes about what is important in Buddhism about meditation. So Buddhism, actually, in meditation in Buddhism has always been very important, and it still is. And meditation in Buddhism is about clearing the mind of obstacles, of the negative emotions and unrealistic perceptions that assail our mind. And the way we deal with them is allowing the mind to be more clear, more bright. And as a result, all the negative emotions, unrealistic perceptions, they tend to sink down. Another comparison, apart from the pool of mud that I mentioned before, you can also make a comparison with a snow globe that you buy in a souvenir shop. I think I already mentioned that in the previous session. So if you have a snow globe and you buy one of those little snow globes with a dancing couple or a Fuji mountain, or perhaps in America it would be the Grand Canyon perhaps, and you shake it around, it would become very white and you can only see snow. You can't really see what's in there. If you put it down on a still spot, the snow globe becomes clear and you can see clearly what's in there. The same way we can understand ourselves and our life better. We can understand others better if our mind is more clear. So that is a summary of what meditation, the meaning of meditation is in Buddhism. Of course, it doesn't mean that all the scientific research about meditation, which I summarized in the beginning, is incorrect. All of that is correct. It's just that when you ask the question, why do Buddhist people traditionally meditate, then that is the answer. It's to deal with negative emotions and unrealistic perceptions in the mind. So are there any questions or any comments about this topic of today?